Hello everyone, this is part 18 of What If Naruto Wants to Surpass the 9 Tails, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Naruto glared at a field full of kunai that were inscribed with temporary Hiraishin formulas. He'd been practicing the technique for the whole damned morning and he was absolutely no closer to getting any better at it than he'd been at the start of it. He could use the technique just fine and he could even lock onto a particular kunai, provided that he was given time to do it, but he was failing miserably at making it combat worthy. For one thing, it took him too much time to lock onto a particular Hiraishin beacon to make it usable in combat, and for another, the disorienting feeling of the teleportation made him a sitting duck for the precious moments that he needed to get his bearings. Slowly, he had gotten familiar enough with the teleporting to lessen the disorientation slightly. He could only imagine how much practice his old man had needed with this shit to have gotten his nickname of the Yellow Flash. Granted, Naruto thought it was a pretty lame nickname, but being able to teleport around with that kind of speed would have been great. An unfortunate side effect of being 6 feet 7 inches, however, was that you simply couldn't move as fast as a smaller person would be able to. The other problem was something that Naruto had no choice but to give up on for the moment. The main issue was that the Hiraishin was just as much ninjutsu as it was fuinjutsu, and he simply couldn't muster the chakra control required to properly lock onto a specific beacon with anything resembling speed. At least it was still good as a way to move around quickly and covertly when out of combat. Maybe one day, when life had calmed down and he was sitting his immortal or on a rocking chair somewhere, bored out of his mind, he might put in what might end up being several decades worth of chakra control training. Then maybe, just maybe, he'd actually be able to use a technique that could be called subtle. That was, if he didn't manage to find some kind of convenient alternative before that. Naruto wasn't even going to consider the possibility of failing to become immortal. He felt more certain that he could do it than ever, especially since he now had conclusive proof that immortality was possible in Hidden. Left with no choice but to label a combat-worthy Hiraishin as an indefinite work in progress, because Uzumaki Naruto did not fail. He got delayed, set back, stymied or obstructed, but he did not fail. He gathered up the scattered kunai. On another note, he really didn't like using kunai either. The all-purpose shinobi weapon of choice was just so damn tiny, not to mention that he couldn't help thinking of them as a sharpened gardening tool ever since he'd learned of their original purpose. Deciding to refocus his attention on the other famous technique that his father had been known for, he created a Rasengan. It was shiny. He'd avoided using the technique because, as a side effect of his massive chakra increase during the 3-year training trip, the Rasengan was now a very bright miniature sun in his hand. The one time he had tried to actually slam it into something, it had exploded rather violently. Fortunately, he'd been paranoid enough to make a clone to it. Naruto was forced to label his Rasengan a kinjutsu, because it would F him up almost as much as the guy who got hit by it. Well, not quite as badly, he was pretty sturdy after all, but he wouldn't be getting out of it unscathed. As it was now, he might as well stick to punching things. He'd focused most of his attention during the training trip on researching various seals that might be useful to his end goal of immortality and becoming powerful enough that Xana would marry him. Unfortunately, it appeared that except for increasing his own chakra capacity, he hadn't made a lot of progress on that front. And honestly, that chakra capacity was for the most part only good for powering his healing factor. The entire 3 years spent with Jiraiya had sucked. Mostly because he'd been separated from Xana, but also because he felt that his progress had been glacial. He just didn't have enough information to go on. A man could only get so many ideas before he got stumped and needed new experiences to spark more ideas. He couldn't wait to run into some more Akatsuki members. So far they'd all been freaks with some unique abilities. If he was lucky, he might run into some kind of combination of things that would let him live forever and give him a way to achieve ultimate power. He could hope, though he doubted it would be that simple, though experimenting on Hidden had already given him quite a few ideas. He'd really struck gold with that one. The fight against Hidden and Kakazu had highlighted that he was distinctly deficient at ranged combat as well, which was why he was in his self-made training field, trying to figure out how to fix that problem. Jiraiya had mentioned something about adding an element to the Rasengan and completing it. His old man had apparently died before he had time to do it, and Jiraiya had tried and failed. Naruto wasn't entirely sure that adding an element to his already dangerously overpowered Rasengan was altogether wise, but he'd never made any claims to wisdom anyway. He was going to stay away from wind for the moment, because his control with that was bad enough as it was. There was no need to try controlling it while added to the Rasengan. Wind was such a damn finicky element. His first attempt to add water to the Rasengan achieved nothing except to spray a very fine mist of water into his face at high speed. Apparently there was just such a high chakra pressure in the Rasengan that the water was repelled violently. Well, at least it would cause some damage if he could somehow make the water stick to it for a while. Several hours later, Naruto and 4 clones of him were working on their latest attempt at creating some kind of water-infused Rasengan. It was rather simple in principle really. If the Rasengan pushed the water away, then all he needed was something that would push it back. This was why the original was holding up the Rasengan, while 3 of his clones used their chakra to push the water against it. The final clone was used to add water. Naruto had also discarded his coat, because previous attempts at this had proven that it had explosive results upon failure, and there was no point in damaging a perfectly good coat. A bead of sweat rolled down his face as he struggled to keep the technique stable despite the crushing outside force that his clones were applying to the shell of water that was now swirling violently around the inner core. The 4th clone kept adding more and more water, but the sphere didn't get any bigger due to the tightly controlled area of pressure the other 3 clones were applying. Naruto wasn't exactly sure just how much water was compacted into the sphere by now, but he knew that it was a lot. By the time that the 4th clone had stopped adding water, the sphere of extreme density water was spinning with blurring speed. Naruto tried to slow it down, but the whole thing had gone into an unstoppable chain reaction. The pressure being exerted from the outside was causing it to spin ever faster, but if they stopped putting pressure on it, then it would explode with shattering force, so Naruto decided to try and slow it down before he took away the pressure. He also didn't want to just dispel the Rasengan spinning inside the water dome. The last time he had tried that, all the water had naturally exploded into the only direction where no force was being applied, downwards, right at his hand. It was a good thing he had only tried that with a small amount of water, or else he would suddenly have become left-handed. Unfortunately, the volatile experiment had gotten away from him and it just kept getting faster despite his best efforts. It was sort of stable, but Naruto knew that it wasn't going to be pretty when this finally blew up on him. Going for a rather desperate attempt at minimizing the damage, Naruto placed his left palm near the ball of water, gathered a massive amount of chakra into it and gave a look towards the clone on the opposite side of him. Nodding its understanding, the clone in question prepared to stop exerting pressure. The original slapped his palm against the ball of water a split second after the clone stopped exerting pressure. The repelling nature of too much chakra pushed violently against the water and the Rasengan inside it, deforming the sphere and destabilizing it beyond hope of recovery. The unstable ninjutsu experiment was blasted away from his hand and towards the clone on the other side, losing coherency even as it flew. The incredibly fast spin caused it to spit out tiny, but extremely dense, water needles at near supersonic speeds in all directions. When it hit a tree that was behind that clone, all of the water that had been funneled into it exploded violently. Naruto instinctively used his arms to shield his head, which saved him from getting his eyes shredded by the tiny water needles. The rest of him, however, was not so fortunate as he was struck by the aftermath of his latest ninjutsu failure. He was rather lucky all in all, because he had gotten into the habit of using his mostly useless body of iron technique as much as possible and as fast as possible whenever these failures occurred. So technically, he had actually managed to make some progress with ninjutsu, just not the one he had been going for. Despite the protection granted to him by toughening his body up like that though, he wasn't particularly well off. Instead of being reduced to small bloody chunks by the spray of water needles, he was turned into a single, large bloody chunk. The blonde collapsed into a large pool of water that was rapidly being stained red, even as his healing factor struggled to get him fixed up. At the edge of the clearing, all the trees started collapsing due to having their trunks torn to shreds by countless thousands of water needles. What the hell were you thinking? Tsunade yelled at Naruto, who was currently lying in a hospital bed after his brush with near deaths. The disturbance that his explosive attempt at adding water to the Rasengan had caused more than enough of a ruckus that Anbu had come to investigate and found his mostly dead sea lying in a bloody puddle. If it hadn't been for the many mystical palm seals he had on him, that would have killed him for certain. I was trying to see if I could add my water element to the Rasengan. Naruto answered with a shrug. He honestly didn't see what the big deal was. He was alive, wasn't he? Okay, so he'd been in a healing coma for nearly 5 hours and he only had about as much chakra as your average cage left, but so what? What he'd been trying was very chakra intensive and the healing was also chakra intensive. Without supervision. Do you have any idea how dangerous something like that is? Jiraiya, who was also present, asked in disbelief. Kind of hard to miss since I'm the one that got turned into hamburger meat. Naruto answered with a snicker. Besides, if anyone but me had been there, they would have been torn to shreds. The two Sannin were a bit disturbed at how nonchalant the blonde was being about his near death, but conceded that he had a point about anyone else being killed. It didn't mean he was off the hook though. Or they would have told you that what you were doing was incredibly stupid. Jiraiya countered angrily. Most of his anger was because he'd been truly terrified that his godson would die after seeing him practically torn to pieces. Why did you choose now of all times to try that anyway? You never showed any interest in finishing the Rasengan before. Because I need some ninjutsu aside from my chains. I know that I'm easily S rank even without, but I've got no versatility. Sooner or later someone is going to come along that has some kind of weird ability to neutralize my chains and then I'll be stuck with nothing but taijutsu. Even my gloves are just a poor substitute, no matter what an awesome piece of work they are. Naruto explained, causing the two Sannin to look at each other contemplatively. Well, I've got a proposition for you. It's something that I've been meaning to ask for a while now, but something always came up. Jiraiya said with a serious tone. In other words, you got caught up in your peeping and forgot about it. Naruto countered blandly, causing Tsunade to smirk and Jiraiya to face fault. Anyway, it's about the next stage of your training with me. Jiraiya said, making no attempt to deny his peeping. He knew that Naruto didn't really care if he peeped anyway. I thought you already taught me everything you could, oh lesser seal master. The blonde said back with a smirk. Jiraiya's eyebrow twitched at the reminder that some brat over 30 years his junior was leagues better than him at Fuinjutsu. Even if it was his godson and he was proud of him for it, that was really frickin' embarrassing. There is one last thing that I can teach you, or more accurately, I can recommend you to the Toad Elders for teaching. The white-haired Sannin said, being deliberately vague. Now Naruto's interest was piqued and he made no attempt to hide it. What in the world could the Toads possibly teach him that was worth all this hype? What kind of teaching are we talking about here? Jiraiya puffed himself up, intending to go into a long-winded and dramatic introduction to Senjutsu when his thunder was stolen by Tsunade. Senjutsu, the sage arts, she said flatly. Jiraiya deflated. Do tell. Naruto encouraged, very intrigued. Jiraiya gave him the short explanation of Senjutsu, claiming that the Toad Elders would explain it to him in greater detail once they summoned him to Myobokuzen. Naruto was going to press for some more details when a rather pissed-off-looking redhead slammed the door open. Naruto bounded out of bed, dressed only in the ridiculous hospital gown that he'd been given. The hospital staff had quite a lot of trouble finding one in his size. His pants had been a lost cause unfortunately. He'd really liked those pants too. Xana, it's great to. C.U. He trailed off into a question uncertainly upon seeing that she was still looking incredibly angry. What is this I hear about you nearly getting yourself killed during training? She hadn't actually heard it from anyone. She'd read his thoughts when he hadn't come home after his training. She'd gotten worried. Naruto sheepishly scratched at his head and let out a nervous laugh, much to the incredulity of the two Sannin in the room. They had never seen the blonde act even slightly awkward and yet here he was being scolded for his recklessness and looking almost normal. Unknown to them, the situation was very far out of normal as far as Naruto was concerned. This was the first time that Xana had reacted like this to a training accident. Sure, he'd never been hurt this badly before, but this reaction seemed quite extreme. He found himself unable to be flippant about his near-fatal blunder during training in the face of her anger. Not because she was angry, mind you, but because of the reason for her anger. Well, everyone in the room stiffened at that one word. Tsunade and Jiraiya could feel something off about it, but were unable to point their finger at what exactly it was. There was quite simply a sense of power in that one word that they had never heard from anyone before. Naruto stiffened because he knew exactly what it was, and it must mean that Xana was well and truly pissed off to not bother suppressing the chakra flow to her throat and voice box. Well, I was trying to add water to the Rasengan and it sort of blew up on me. Naruto explained, trying to make it sound like less of a big deal than it really was. And you didn't think to exercise some more caution when doing this? She hissed at him, her displeasure still vividly clear. Naruto said nothing and just shifted awkwardly. It had been a long while since he had needed to exercise any kind of restraint, especially with his new and improved healing factor, so it had not in fact occurred to him. Man, Naruto, you got a real spitfire on your hands, and such a babe too. Jiraiya said, quite obviously leering. Xana turned to the white-haired monkey in irritation. If she had been in one of her better moods, which were now quite frequent thanks to Naruto, she might have found him amusing and done something to mess with his head. Right now, however, was not one of her good moods. It was not even a neutral mood. Right at this moment, she was in fact in a foul mood and thus didn't feel like humoring some idiot human. Jiraiya didn't know what hit him as he went flying over tea kettle right out of the closed window, the window which was on the 3rd floor. As he lay on the ground outside of the hospital, sporting several cuts from the glass and a bruised back from the fall, he admitted to himself that perhaps it would have been wiser to stay silent. Fortunately, he was a shinobi, so it was nothing life-threatening, but he got the feeling that Naruto's ex-girlfriend had pulled her punch a great deal. Was this attraction to volatile redheads some kind of genetic quirk that Minato had passed down to his son? Jiraiya wondered. Tsunade watched her former teammate get smacked out of the window like a misbehaving academy student with some shock and no small amount of satisfaction. Served him right for trying to pee on Naruto's girl. Right, I suppose I should do the introductions. Naruto muttered more to himself than anyone else. Tsunade, this is Xana. Xana, this is Senju Tsunade, the current Hokage. The two women nodded towards each other and then Xana turned away from Tsunade in the most arrogantly dismissive gesture that the slug Sanin had ever seen, returning her focus to Naruto. Tsunade clamped down on her volatile temper, which had been roused by the apparent insult, telling herself that the redhead was simply more concerned about her lover than propriety right now. Not wanting things to escalate any further, Naruto gave his favorite demoness a hug. I promise I won't be so careless again. Xana instantly calmed down, even though she still felt like being angry at him for nearly getting himself killed. She knew that he would never break a promise and it was hard to be angry when he hugged her like that. Infuriating blonde idiot, she thought to herself without any rancor. Tsunade looked at the touching scene and couldn't help smiling. It was so nice to see Naruto acting normally around the woman he loved. Quote, Tsunade rubbed her forehead as she walked out of the room. She had definitely been spending too much time with Naruto if his warped sense of humor was rubbing off on her to this extent, but damn it, he was the only one that would go drinking and gambling with her. Shizune was always harping about how it was improper for a Hokage to do such things. Several hours later, Naruto and Xana were lying in each other's arms, facing each other, having returned to the apartment after their fun in the hospital break room. Naruto was asleep, but Xana was not. She'd been truly afraid today after taking a look at his memories, afraid of losing him. He had been unconscious when she had done so, so the memories were confused and fragmented. All she had seen was him getting torn to pieces by that attempted technique. It had been so very close, all it would have taken was a little more damage and he would have died this day and left her alone. The thought of it seemed so much more terrible than anything else that she could imagine. If it was in her power, she would have kept him young forever, would have asked him to seal her back inside of himself so that she could do it, but that wasn't something that she was capable of. She had made changes to his body, such as making sure that he would be as big as he was now, but that was a fairly minor change. Trying to keep him from aging was another matter entirely. It didn't help that her power was almost entirely focused on destruction, something that had been a source of pride for her at first, but now it just left her feeling bitter that she had so much power and it was utterly useless. His time was already so very short and the idiot was going out of his way to put himself at risk. First, his dangerous and reckless attempts at creating that powerful ninjutsu and now senjutsu training. Senjutsu had ironically first been discovered by the summoning clans several centuries after the Sage of Six Paths had died. In other words, Otsutsuki Hagoromo had not been a sage in the same sense as those who mastered senjutsu were. Many had been turned to stone during their meditations when they had unknowingly drawn in the natural energies of the world, until one day someone had managed to tame the power and balance it within themselves. Only a rare few humans had ever managed this feat, but all of them had attained immense power from it. Senju Hashirama had been the most recent human sage that she knew of. Empowered by natural energy and coupled with his powerful mokuton, that man might have actually been capable of fighting against her on even footing for a short while before he exhausted himself. It was just a guess though, since she hadn't actually seen him fight, only seen the valley that he and Madara had carved out with their battle. It was unlikely that he could have sustained the effort for more than a minute at the very most though. Madara had been able to use his giant Susanoo to defend himself long enough to escape her, which she had to admit was impressive in its own right, even though she hated the man. Eventually word of senjutsu had reached her and she had been curious about it. Her attempts at learning it however had only served to prove that it was impossible. The natural energy of the world avoided her like the plague, her demonic nature and chakra forcing it away. It had been the greatest proof of just how unnatural her existence was that she could have possibly received. She was now rather ashamed of the fact that she had wiped out the wolf tribe in a fit of rage at the revelation. They hadn't deserved that. She had kept her true nature hidden from them and sought them out to learn it. It wasn't as if they had tried to run her out after discovering that she couldn't learn it or anything, she had simply been angry and they had been there. It had been an act of mindless spite that was beneath her, but she had been too angry to care. That event had been what had truly convinced her that she needed to learn how to control her anger better. Naruto seemed excited to learn senjutsu, so she wouldn't try to stop him despite her misgivings, but she had told him everything that she knew about senjutsu, trying to give him the best possible chance of mastering it that she could. She had even told him what she had done to the wolves, but her wonderful blonde idiot hadn't cared. He easily acknowledged that it had been wrong to destroy them, but dismissed it as not being important any longer in the same breath. But there was no helping the worry that plagued her. Would the Toad Elders send a messenger in a few weeks' time to inform them that Naruto was now a statue, doomed to stand as yet another grim warning to prospective sages for eternity? The thought of it was unbearable and she clenched her eyes shut tightly when they started to sting in response to her depressing train of thought. What's wrong? Naruto asked with confusion, some sleep still clouding his mind. Xana opened her eyes to find that she had unknowingly dug her claws into his chest. The sight of her fingers sunk into his skin with blood leaking around them, right above his heart, did nothing to soothe her distress and she jerked her hand away, feeling a sudden irrational fear that he would die on her. What's wrong, love? Why are you crying? He asked in alarm upon noticing the tear streaks on her face, immediately forgetting that she had just stabbed him. In all the years that he had known her, she had never showed even the slightest hint of weakness, so to wake up and see her crying was jarring in the extreme. The demoness wiped at her face with her hand, noting with shock that she had indeed been crying. She had never cried before, but then again, she never had anything to cry about either. Eternal life may have been terribly dull at times, but this was the first time that she had something that would be truly painful to lose. Your injury today and the risks of senjutsu have just made it glaringly obvious how fragile you are. She said sadly, the depressing thoughts of before still lingering. Don't worry, I'll be more careful from now on and I'll master this senjutsu thing for sure. I'm not going to get myself killed. Naruto assured and held her closer. Even if you become a sage, you will still be mortal, I will still lose you. She said with the same despondent tone, leaning her forehead on his chest. It was wonderful to be held like this, but it was also terrible. Wonderful for the comfort it provided and terrible because it would only last for another 100 years at the most if she was lucky. She almost regretted sticking around after he had released her from the seal, but his bullheaded determination had caught her interest and she found herself wanting to see what would happen. Interest had turned into a genuine fondness, not to mention that his obvious lust for her had been very amusing. Then one day she decided to reward his endless devotion and slept with him. He had been just as clumsy as you'd expect a first-timer to be, so she had told him to get some more experience, though she had simultaneously also demanded that he stay loyal to her. That had been blatantly selfish of her, because she had enjoyed the thought of having him belong to her, even if she hadn't felt the same devotion to him. Contrary to most normal logic, as was usual for Naruto, he had been pleased by her selfish demand, seeing it as a sign that she felt something for him. It hadn't been, or maybe Naruto had seen deeper into her own action than she had. Despite his clear reluctance, he had done so, swallowing down his embarrassment to seek out those women in the brothel, but had stopped as soon as he felt he had learned enough. But she hadn't been satisfied with that, so she had pushed him to continue, knowing that it would help him to get rid of that pesky feeling of shame that humans were so burdened with. Along with that, she also wanted to see what would happen when he would eventually run into a mortal woman that he could have stayed with. When he had turned his back on that opportunity in exchange for a difficult and uncertain future with her, the first seeds of this current situation had been planted. After that, things had just kept snowballing until she suddenly found herself in tears at the thought of him dying. She just knew that his death would destroy what contentment she had managed to get out of her life thus far. The few things that she enjoyed would no longer interest her, because he would no longer be there to share it with her. Poking fun at mortals wouldn't be funny anymore, because all she would be able to think about would be how much better it would have been if he was there too. I'll never die. No matter what I have to do, I will become immortal and we will spend eternity together, that's a promise. He said with absolute conviction. He would not give in to doubt, not when he was so close he could practically taste it. Xana looked at her lover and saw the same unwavering belief that there was a way to achieve his goal that he had always carried. Maybe he truly would find a way to do it, she could only hope. It wasn't like she had any choice in the matter anyway. This was simply one of those things that she had no power over, so she did her best to shake off the depressing mood and enjoy the moment. An hour later, Xana was asleep, but Naruto was not. Seeing her in tears, it brought home the fact that his death would hurt her. This hadn't been a problem when he had started on his path, and it hadn't been a problem for years afterwards, but it was a problem now. He couldn't abide the thought of causing her pain, which meant that he had to be more careful with himself. He'd meant it when he had made his promise to be more careful, but now it held personal value to him. It also brought home the fact that he could not afford to stay mortal, because his mortality was hurting her. He would find a way, even if he had to burn down heaven. Naruto stared contemplatively at the severed arm that Obito had left behind. He just knew that there had to be something special about that arm. Well, anyone could have figured that much out if he was honest with himself. It was such a pale green that it was practically white, and it had fallen off when it was starved of chakra after all. With a shrug to himself, Naruto decided to just add chakra and see what happens. That would probably tell him something at least. He reached for the arm and was just about to forcibly channel some chakra into it when he stopped. Maybe it would be better to cut off a small part of it and have a clone do it. He thought, his recent blunder with attempting to do too much at once still fresh in his mind. Course of action decided, the original stepped away as the clone used a knife to cut away a small strip of skin from the arm and placed it on another table. Naruto gawked in disbelief at the bonsai that sprouted from the strip of skin. What the hell kind of sense did that make? The only one to have ever been capable of growing trees like that was the Shodai, and Obito most definitely was not the Shodai. Alright, so the arm was clearly not his own, and Naruto doubted that Obito had robbed the Shodai's grave and hacked the right arm off his corpse and then attached it to himself. For one thing, that arm would have been skeletal by now. He really wished that he could take a tissue sample and have it analyzed, but he didn't fancy being accused of grave robbing or being asked uncomfortable questions about how exactly he came into possession of such a thing. Not having that option at the moment, Naruto knew that he would need to make some educated guesses here. Considering that the arm didn't seem to bleed and that it was apparently both heavily chakra reactive and reliant, he felt safe in assuming that it was somehow artificially created. His discussions with Xana on the subject, along with his own experimentation with yin-yang combinations, made that seem like the most likely possibility. Creating a functioning replacement limb from what was obviously Senju Hashirama's genetic material was far beyond his ability though. Since Obito had admitted to the fact that Madara had taken him in after his supposed death, it made the legendary Uchiha the most likely culprit. There was no information about him having that kind of ability, which meant that the man had probably learned it sometime after he had gone to ground. All very interesting, and it did explain the mystery of the arm, but it was not particularly useful right now, so he sealed the arm into a scroll for safekeeping and to prevent decay. He wasn't quite sure why the Shodai cells had been used. Maybe Madara had tried to steal the Mokuton or something. Naruto berated himself for not asking Obito that question before he had killed him. Actually, now that he thought about it, there had been a lot of questions that he could have asked. There was no guarantee that Obito would have answered them, but it had been very stupid of him to not even ask. Now he was stuck making guesses and trying to figure things out himself from what few pieces of information he had. Turning his attention to the other acquisition from Obito, Naruto unsealed 2 Sharingan eyes, one regular and one Mangenkyo. He was sorely tempted to implant at least the Mangenkyo into himself, knowing just how powerful it was, but knew that it would probably be unwise. For one thing, he was not a medic, so he couldn't do it himself, and for another it would be terribly hard to explain. He wanted to become as powerful as possible as quickly as possible, but he knew better than to blindly claw at every possible advantage and rely on power that wasn't truly his. That Mangenkyo Sharingan was quite possibly the single most dangerous thing he had encountered so far. The ability to so freely manipulate space-time was ridiculous, and he knew that he'd been obscenely lucky that Obito had been so arrogantly certain that nothing could touch him. If the man hadn't blundered into his trap like that, then Naruto honestly didn't know how he could have possibly beaten someone that can become intangible with just a thought. With a sign at the missed opportunity, because it really would have been hilarious to have the ability to become intangible at will, Naruto slammed his palm onto the 2 shiny red eyeballs and squashed them flat. Cleaning the goo from his palm, the blonde turned towards Hiden, who had been watching all of this with some interest. Ever since the crazy blonde had started using him as a test subject for his experiments, Hiden had been aware of the fact that Akatsuki wasn't as well informed as they should have been. Seeing him take down Toby, who had turned out to be some guy named Obito and wasn't an idiot at all, and then mentioned that Madara had been his teacher, well, it had put a lot of perspective on things. Hiden wasn't the most well-educated of people, but even he knew who Uchiha Madara was. The far bigger shock, however, had been the fact that the Kyuubi was walking around scot-free and conspicuously unsealed, in human form no less. That was the event that had well and truly told him that Akatsuki didn't really know what they were dealing with. On the other hand, the blonde didn't know what he was dealing with either. Obito had made no mention of the Rinnegan, and Hiden refused to speak about it simply out of spite. The Uzumaki had certainly tried to interrogate him, but Hiden was well used to dealing with pain, and the blonde was far from being an expert at torture. He seemed to dislike the idea of torture actually. He certainly had no problem causing pain with his experiments, but he didn't do it out of malice. He may have given up on the idea of getting out of here under his own power, but he refused to say anything that would help this heathen that had desecrated his scythe by giving it away like a party favor. Alright Hiden, I'm going to remove the gag and we're going to have a short little conversation. If you can refrain from cursing like a sailor for a minute and listen to me, that is. Naruto said dryly. The Jashinist said nothing, simply glared murderously at his captor as his gag was removed. I'm going to be leaving for a wheel. I don't know how long, but it could be anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, which is why I've got an offer for you. What kind of offer could AF heretic like you possibly have that I'd be interested in? Hiden asked with a furious scowl, looking as if he'd like nothing better than to bite the blonde's throat out. I can put a seal on you that will keep you unconscious for the time that I'm gone, so that you don't spend all that time chained to a table with nothing to do. Naruto said. As if I have anything to do otherwise. Hiden yelled back, incensed. True enough, but I'm leaving this one up to you. Either you stay awake while you're chained here, or I knock you out, but you're staying chained to this table either way. Naruto said back with a shrug. You're AF bastard, you know that Uzumaki. You're the bad guy here, being a Masem and all, so I think I'm actually being incredibly nice by giving you a choice. Naruto said with another shrug. Honestly, a guy tries to be nice and gets verbal abuse in return. If you were so damn nice, then you wouldn't be keeping me locked in your basement and experimenting on me, UF. And if you had a seal that could keep me knocked out, why didn't you use it before instead of keeping me conscious? Well, to answer in order. I'm experimenting on you because I really need to figure out how to become immortal, and you're such a conveniently bad guy that I don't feel very guilty about it. As for the seal, well, I only figured it out when Obito activated that trap, and I can't experiment on you while it's active anyway. It appeared that Hidden could only be properly knocked out if his chakra was suppressed completely. Technically, he was dead during that time, but he got better once the chakra was reactivated. Another oddity about Hidden that was, even if his chakra network was dead, it was quickly restored as soon as the yin-yang suppression seal was turned off. Hidden growled at the infuriating blonde and thought his options over. On one hand, it would be boring as hell to be awake for however long it would take the Ahole to come back. On the other hand though, it was boring as hell either way, with the boredom only being interrupted by periods of getting experimented on. The choice seemed obvious, but Hidden saw an opportunity here. Escape was impossible as long as the Uzumaki came into the room frequently, but if he was gone for a long time, then it might be possible. F you Uzumaki. Just get the F out of here and leave me alone. Suit yourself, Naruto said with a shrug and left. He grabbed the miniature tree that had sprouted from the bit of skin that his clone had cut off. He was going to give it to Tsunade as a present, because he found the thought of her having a bonsai grown from a piece of skin that had been cut off an arm that had been made from her grandfather's genetic material to be hilarious. Kisame, Itachi, have you located the Yonbi yet? Pain asked. He had needed called yet another Akatsuki meeting due to recent developments, so the remains of Akatsuki were once more together in their holographic forms. Not yet. The Yonbi Jinchuriki lives like a hermit and tends to move around Earth country erratically. It will take some time to capture him. Itachi answered in his usual monotone. Hey, why isn't Toby here? Kisame asked, having noticed his absence and being highly curious as to why Madara wasn't present. Zetsu has discovered that Hidden is being held captive by the Kyuubi Jinchuriki and Toby went to extract him. Pain said and paused. He did not return and I can no longer sense him through the ring. Silence descended as everyone processed that information. Nobody was under any illusion that Toby was anything but dead. Itachi did not care. If Sasuke had still been alive, he would have been relieved that Madara was dead, but now it no longer mattered. Nothing much mattered anymore. Konan was relieved that Madara was dead. She had never liked him nor trusted him, and the way that he had twisted Nagato over the years sickened her. She believed in the goal of peace and in their method for doing so, but she was also certain that Madara had ulterior motives, which was why she had prepared her trap of 600 billion exploding tags in case it was ever needed. As far as she was concerned, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki had done him a favor. Kisame was saddened by the news. He had put his faith in Madara and his plan to put an end to the world of lies, but it seemed that Madara's assurances had also been a lie. Not an intentional lie perhaps, but a lie all the same. Nagato was relieved as well. Despite his Rinnegan, Madara was capable of simply teleporting to his true body and killing him anytime that he wished. Now Akatsuki would be led as he wished and not under Madara's direction. Now that Akatsuki was under the leadership of God once again, the world would be brought into a time of peace through shared understanding of pain, and when they forgot their pain, he would refresh their memory and bring about another period of peace. Zetsu, or the black half of him anyway, was furious. The damn fool had gotten himself killed and now Madara's plan was in ruins. Madara had recruited Obito as a backup plan in case Nagato proved too difficult to control. There was only so far that a man could plan when they were near death, and Madara had known this. He hadn't been able to foresee how Nagato would turn out after he had transplanted his eyes into him, which was why Obito had been such a convenient pawn, a pawn meant to control another pawn. It had been proven wise when Nagato had developed a god complex and started calling himself Pain. Obito had been able to control him with subtle manipulation and the clear threat of being able to kill him at will, and now that was gone. Pain would not resurrect Madara of his own free will, of this Zetsu was certain, and there were now so very many holes poked into the overall plan, all thanks to the blasted Kyuubi Jinchuriki and Obito's idiocy. There was a way to get the Sanbi out of the ocean, that was no big problem. The problem was that right at this very moment, all of Madara's plans were no longer achievable. Actually, now that Zetsu thought about it, Pain probably couldn't resurrect Madara as he was now, even if he wanted to. His body was crippled and weak, and Madara had been dead for quite a while already. It would take an incredible amount of power to resurrect his creator and restore his youth. It would do no good if Pain used the Rinneya Tensei to reverse the decay on Madara's corpse only to have the strain of it kill him before it was finished, and that wasn't even factoring in how much more difficult it would be to restore the legendary Uchiha to his prime. He would have to improvise and hope that something could be done to salvage this disaster. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki is clearly more dangerous than we had assumed. Everyone is to stay away from him while we focus on the other Beiyu. When the time comes to seal the Kyuubi, Uzumaki Naruto will fall before God. Pain stated. Everyone nodded and their holograms disappeared. Tsunade, Shizune and Zana were relaxing in Konoha's hot spring. Normally, the demoness in disguise wouldn't bother socializing with humans other than Naruto, and yet here she was. Tsunade had seen that the redhead looked sad and worried when they had said goodbye to Naruto, right before he was reverse summoned to Myobokuzen, and decided to invite her to go to the hot spring with her and Shizune. It was now a few days since he had left and they had finally gotten organized enough to go. Zana had been feeling rather listless since Naruto had left, feeling uncharacteristically anxious about how her lover was doing. She could still feel through the Reaper death seal that he was alright, aside from the fact that he was somewhat irritated at something. Annoyed with herself for being constantly worried about the possibility of her lover being turned into a statue, she had accepted Tsunade's proposal. Still, she had to admit that Tsunade wasn't bad as far as humans go. A bit too much of a prude perhaps, but that was something that most humans seem to be plagued with. At least it could serve as a source of amusement at times. So, I've been wondering, how did you and Naruto meet? Tsunade asked. She'd already asked Naruto, but this was a chance to get a woman's perspective on it, along with perhaps some details. Oh, he was 10 years old at the time and some of the village idiots had broken all the windows in his apartment in the middle of winter. He was pretty much freezing to death when I found him and took him in. Zana explained nonchalantly. Tsunade and Shizune's faces darkened upon hearing that. They'd been aware that Naruto didn't have a good childhood, but he didn't speak of it and didn't seem to let it bother him over much either, so it was easy to forget. I didn't expect him to propose to me, but he always has been surprising. She continued with a fond smile, remembering some of the things he had done over the years. That must have been awkward. Tsunade said with a snicker. A little, but it was kind of cute too. He would visit me every day that he could after that. Sometimes I needed to take care of any wounds that he might have gotten during training, since he has a habit of overdoing it. All three of them vividly remembered Naruto's recent brush with death because of training. Well, I'm glad he had someone like you around to take care of him when he was little. He's grown up into a fine man, even if he is AP. Tsunade said, only grumbling slightly at the end. Despite her usual dislike of P, it was hard to dislike Naruto. At least he didn't peek on women when they were bathing. The fact that he's AP makes it even better. It's something that I've spent many years encouraging. The demoness said with a smirk. But why? Tsunade asked in surprise and confusion. Oh, she knew that Naruto had no doubt gotten some of his perversions from the redhead, but she didn't why the redhead wanted him to be AP. Because it's so much more fun that way. You can ask Shizune all about it. Zana said with a fanged grin pointed towards the silent woman. Shizune had been quiet so far, just enjoying the hot water, but feeling a little bit of envy towards the redhead. Her envy stemmed from her slight insecurity about her small b and lack of romantic partner, especially in comparison to the beautiful redhead. Tsunade turned an inquisitive gaze on her first apprentice and raised an eyebrow. Shizune slowly sank lower into the water until only her eyes were visible, her blush quite clear. Come on Shizune, do tell. Tsunade prodded with a smirk. She just knew that this was going to be good. I walked in on him in the hospital break room. Shizune said reluctantly, blushing fiercely. Tsunade couldn't help bursting into laughter, remembering vividly what kind of plans Naruto and Zana had been making for anyone that walked in on him that day. They put you in chains and made you watch, didn't they? Tsunade asked through her laughter. It's not funny. Shizune insisted, her face burning so hot that the water was starting to feel cold. Alright, I'm sorry, Tsunade said, though still laughing slightly. Did you get mocked for being turned on too? Tsunade-sama. Tsunade started chortling again. Damn it, she was certainly starting to see the appeal of Naruto's sense of humor. Watching people die of embarrassment was hilarious. You wouldn't be laughing if it happened to you. Shizune grumbled sourly, sinking back into the water. Well, it didn't happen to me. Tsunade retorted smugly. Xana glided stealthily towards the busty Hokage and pushed her bee into the blonde's larger ones, putting her arms around Tsunade's neck at the same time. I'm sure we could accommodate you just as easily, Tsunade. Who knows, if you live up to your nickname of being the legendary sucker, you might even get to join in on the fun. The demoness purred suggestively, severely violating the woman's personal space. Tsunade immediately tried to squirm away, but the redhead kept her pinned with surprising strength. That's quite alright, I think getting put in chains by Naruto once was enough. She said uncomfortably and tried to get away. Are you sure? I'm sure you'd enjoy yourself and you could compare the experience with your apprentice. Xana prodded further and deliberately leaned closer as if to K her. Quite sure, Tsunade said, somewhat panicked and her face looking like it was boiling. She managed to get free and leveled a betrayed look at Shizune, who was now giggling behind her hand. Shizune completely ignored the look, feeling vindicated now that Tsunade had gotten embarrassed as well. Tsunade scowled to herself slightly. It really wasn't all that funny when it happened to you. She looked towards the redhead, with every intention of telling her not to do that again, only to see the woman hefting a stone about the size of her fist. Before Tsunade could ask her what she intended to do with that rock, Xana had thrown it with great force towards the wooden wall that divided the male and female section, causing it to go straight through. A high-pitched, but clearly male scream resounded from the other side. More importantly, Tsunade instantly recognized that scream as belonging to Jiraiya when he got hit particularly hard in the nuts. She had been the cause of that scream several times. The redhead walked towards the new hole in the wall, entirely uncaring about her jumped on top of the fence and pulled an agonized Jiraiya over the wall and into the female section. Normally Jiraiya would consider being pulled into the female section paradise, but he was far too busy clutching his battered testicles to care about that at the moment. He couldn't even see anything, since his forehead was pressed into the ground and he was in a kneeling position. Jiraiya. Tsunade ground out in utter fury, fully prepared to kill her former teammate. The Toad Sannin began to sweat at the murder in her tone, but was in far too much pain to even consider moving. He could only hope that his death would be swift. Before the female Sannin could make her move though, Xana squatted right next to the Toad Sage and placed her hand on top of his head, preventing him from lifting it. Oh Jiraiya, what a dreadfully pee hobby you have there, she said in a breathy tone that was clearly designed to attract male attention. Would you like me to give Tsunade a K? Jiraiya almost felt like bursting into tears and he wasn't sure if it was from the pain, the fact that despite all of this happening, he still hadn't even seen anything or the thought of one of Naruto's insane seals being placed somewhere to get back at him for attempting to peek on his woman. Unable to take any more, the gallant Jiraiya fled as fast as he possibly could, running with his legs spread wide in an effort to prevent anything from touching his jewels. Tsunade looked at Xana, feeling seriously impressed. Beating the crap out of Jiraiya was one thing, but using his own perversion against him like that was truly inspired. She was almost tempted to introduce the redhead to Ribiki, but reasoned that it was probably better not to. Hidden pulled at the chains holding him, trying to slip his hand out of the manacle. It hurt like hell, but it was worth it if he could just get free. So far he was having very little luck, but he had to keep trying. Even if he had to get the bones in his hand crushed to pull his hands free, he was getting the hell out of this basement. Then he was going to get his scythe back and probably kill that blonde apprentice while doing it. He wasn't sure if he could make it out of the village, but he would damn sure take as many of them down as possible, even if they caught him again. If he did end up captured, he was going to tell them that the precious Jinchuriki wasn't a Jinchuriki, but was instead a demon mad scientist. The head of a wooden staff smashed into Naruto's head, knocking the natural energy he had gathered right out of him. Ya gotta focus, Naruto-chan. Peace, calm, balance, these are the things ya need in order to master Toad-style senjutsu. Fukasaku scolded. Naruto struggled mightily to prevent himself from scowling in irritation even as his healing factor took care of the slight bump on his head. Who the hell did that senile midget of a toad think he was calling, Naruto-chan? The diminutive amphibian didn't even come up to his knee. He was starting to get really annoyed by now. Training in senjutsu just seemed to consist of getting clobbered over the head with a staff repeatedly, eating bugs and listening to lectures about peace and harmony. There was no demonic L to make him feel better, and he was pissed as hell at Jiraiya for failing to mention that he should bring his own food. In addition to that, doing this senjutsu stuff the way that Fukasaku was teaching it to him just felt wrong. The stillness part had been bad enough, but trying, find inner peace, and let go of worldly concerns so that he could connect himself to nature, was even worse. It was pretty hard to let go of worldly concerns when you wanted to be immortal. If he wanted to abandon all worldly concerns, he would commit suicide. That was much more effective than mind-tricking himself into thinking that he didn't have worldly concerns. Gathering the natural energy of the world around him, the blonde could immediately feel the way that it tried to change him. By accepting the energy of the world around him, he was also taking in its nature. In this case, since he was on a mountain full of toads, covered in toad oil along with no doubt 100 other toad-related things, it tried to turn him into a toad. That was what the energy was used to after all. Natural energy had no sentience of its own, but it gravitated towards what was familiar, and if a human tried to take in the heavily toad-natured energy, then he would turn into a toad if he couldn't harmonize with it. Zana had told him that she had learned from the wolves that senjutsu came far more easily to those who were already of similar nature. Therefore, a toad would have a relatively easy time learning senjutsu in Myobokuzen, but a terribly difficult one in Raichi Cave, which was the home of the Snake Clan. Once senjutsu was mastered, it wouldn't be a problem to mold the natural energy as they wished, but for a learner, location was very important. She had also told him that the Shodai had been a sage, something that was probably not common knowledge. She didn't know where he had learned it, but considering the man's mokuton, he may well have learned it himself. Maybe he had just sat down in a forest somewhere and accidentally discovered it for all anyone knew. It was only natural that he would be close to nature considering his mokuton, so it wasn't all that far-fetched. Naruto was not a toad, and truth be told, did not want to be a toad. Ignoring the words of the old as F-toad sage, the blonde decided to do things his way. What did the old guy know anyway? Naruto never did anything normally, so why should this be any different? He moved his powerful chakra around the invading natural energy and tried to force it into submission. It fought back, struggling to stay the way it was. It didn't want to be changed, didn't want to flow in a way that it wasn't used to. Well, that was too bad, because it was his body and it would obey. Thunk. Ya can't force natural energy to do things your way, Naruto-chan. Calm down and synchronize with it. Let it flow through ya and become part of ya. Naruto's eyebrow twitched in irritation. The hell I can't. Hiden pulled harshly against the chain that held his arm imprisoned, finally managing to get it free. I wasn't without a cost though, as his hand was completely mangled, the bones crushed and skin peeled off from his attempts at getting free. He'd been trying to get free for 2 whole weeks, well that was his best guess anyway. The heathen had bound him so tightly that he could barely move a muscle. It had taken days of pulling at the chains with all the strength that he could muster to budge it enough that he could get some more leverage. After that it had taken some more days to get into a position where he could start pulling at least one hand out, and then some more days to finally loosen the manacle enough to mangle his own hand and pull it out. Now here he was, waiting for his hand to heal so that he could mutilate the rest of his limbs in his attempt for freedom. At least, the rest of them would be relatively quick now that he had one hand free. Several hours later, the Jashinist was laying on his back on that very same metal table, just waiting for his left foot to get back to normal. Crushing your own heel and then waiting for it to fix itself was not fun at all. As soon as it was healed, Hiden swung himself onto the floor, with every intention of getting the F out of the hated basement. Unfortunately for him, his chakra signature was not recognized by the Fuinjutsu traps on the floor, which immediately caused the very same traps that had killed Obito to activate once more. The Jashinist spat out a string of foul curses as he felt what little chakra he had being cut off. A frantic attempt at escape later revealed only an impassable barrier that he had no hope in hell of actually penetrating. Within 20 minutes of the trap activating, Hiden collapsed face down on the ground, temporarily dead. Myobokuzen. Enon covered in toad oil again, Naruto smirked, feeling the beacon inside his basement trap array pinging off his chakra. Apparently Hiden had finally managed to get free. Exactly how stupid do you think I am, Hiden? He thought to himself. Honestly, Hiden's intention to escape was as transparent as air, and Naruto wasn't so arrogant that he would say it was impossible. Those seals had enough chakra to stay active for a good long while, so Hiden was just going to be chillaxing on the floor until he got back and turned him off. It was kind of a whole move to give Hiden hope of escape like that, but honestly, the lunatic immortal would have tried it eventually anyway. Might as well crush all hope sooner rather than later. Thunk. Ya can't space out and think about pretty girls while you're learning Senjutsu, Naruto-chan. Focus. A golden eyebrow quivered in irritation. He hadn't even been thinking about girls. Although, he really did miss Xana. That lustrous red hair, those shining red eyes, that absolutely perfect body. The way she sank her fangs into his neck when she was just about to. Thunk. Damn it, Naruto-chan, stop thinking whatever it is you're thinking. Your flagpole is creeping out the lady toads. I swear, you're worse than Jiraiya-chan. Naruto snickered. What a bunch of ridiculous toads. They weren't even the same species. Why the hell did they care if he was at full mast? You've done it, Naruto-chan. You've mastered Senjutsu, Fukasaku said with pride in his voice. Naruto opened his eyes, now golden with toad-like bars instead of pupils and orange pigmentation on his eyelids. It had taken him quite a while, but he had managed to synchronize with the natural energy the way that Fukasaku had been teaching him. Why then, did it feel so uncomfortable? Don't get him wrong, he felt far more powerful now than he was before, but using Senjutsu like this just didn't feel quite right. He felt more at peace, passive and accepting. But Uzumaki Naruto was not passive and accepting, he couldn't afford to be. He still had so much to do and so far to go. The threat of Akatsuki didn't matter to him, they had already proven themselves incapable of stopping him, but he couldn't allow himself to slow down until he was immortal. He could not be passive and accept the fact that he was mortal. Now, I know that standing still in the middle of battle to enter Sage mode isn't possible, so Ma and I will be working on fusing with you and helping you in battle that way, along with teaching you the frog kata. The memory of how Chio had been able to feel the lack of Bayu inside him through her reincarnation technique surged through Naruto's mind. He couldn't allow that information to get out yet, and he didn't trust these toads enough to tell them. I don't think that's a good idea, the QB doesn't really play nice with others. That should be a good enough excuse. Still, it's worth at least a try, isn't it? Fukasaku insisted. I have no idea what would happen if we tried that, so let me try to find an alternative first. There were always alternatives. Alright, I guess there's no harm in trying to find another way. The old toad agreed. After that, Naruto was left alone and allowed the natural energy to leave his body. He almost sighed in relief when he felt the annoying sense of peace leave him. It was artificial, a result of having the natural energy molded in the style of the toads. There would be no true peace for him until he was immortal and could call Xana his wife. Honestly, Naruto could easily see now that he was a poor choice as a toad sage. The toads were good company to be sure, and he rather liked Gamabunta in particular, but their version of Senjutsu simply rubbed him the wrong way. He would have preferred to learn Senjutsu from a more predatory tribe of summons, but he didn't know any. Well, he supposed the snakes were fairly predatory, but it would be rather hard to convince Orochimaru to give up the snake summons. Naruto shook off the unproductive thoughts, it was no use thinking of things like that. Toad Senjutsu was better than no Senjutsu, even if he didn't like the side effects it had on his feelings. Turning his attention to the more pressing problem of how to stay in Sage mode without staying still, Naruto's mind immediately drifted to his magical solution to everything, Fuinjutsu. It would probably take a lot of work to make a seal that would allow him to store natural energy and then release it into his chakra network without overwhelming him, but he was sure that it could be done. Fortunately, due to his vast reserves of chakra and extremely developed chakra coils, his margin for error was actually quite considerable. It would take a large blunder to turn him to stone. What he needed was a seal array that would allow him to hold a large amount of natural energy and simultaneously still be connected to his chakra network. This meant that he would need to paint it on his skin. He would need to calibrate it in such a way that he could control the flow of natural energy, or perhaps even make it automatic so that it would always release just the right amount, but that would require him to do a lot of fiddling with the seal to test it out. It would also need to be very powerful to hold in the natural energy, because that stuff was strong. Naruto sat on the ground, taping his finger to his chin, deep in thought about all the things he would need to do for this. It would definitely be one of his more ambitious undertakings, not to mention dangerous. Suddenly, an idea hit him with such force that it practically made his head snap back. He looked down at his stomach and channeled some chakra. The Reaper Death Seal appeared, sitting oh so innocently on his skin. He could swear it was winking at him. It was a seal empowered by a god, designed to hold the most powerful demon in existence. That powerful demon just so happened to be a soul fragment of a demonic god with chakra powerful enough to form a physical body. It was connected to his chakra network and designed to release measured amounts of that demonic chakra into him. He had fiddled with it enough that he knew it forwards and backwards by now. He could change it to suit his purposes. And it was ever so conveniently empty, just waiting to be filled up with something else, such as natural energy. A slow, but utterly massive grin formed on Naruto's face. With the amount of chakra that Xana held, he could store enough natural energy into the Reaper Death Seal to keep him in sage mode for weeks if he had to. Maybe even indefinitely if he could find a way to tweak the seal in such a way that it would passively absorb natural energy, while simultaneously releasing it into his coils. Still grinning, Naruto got to work on altering the Reaper Death Seal to his specifications. He wanted to leave the mental link aspect of it alone, but pretty much everything else was fair game. Jiraiya and Tsunade were in the Hokage's office and the Toad Sannin was just about to summon Naruto and Fukasaku. He had received word just a few minutes ago that he urgently needed to summon them both, and it made his gut clench with worry at the thought that something had gone wrong with the senjutsu training. He sped through the hand seals and slapped his hand on the floor, causing the summoning script to spread across the office. I already said I was sorry, damn it. How was I supposed to know that was going to happen? Naruto was saying in a near yell, sounding extremely agitated. What the hell did ya think was going to happen, ya stupid tadpole? Ya can't just do something like that without any consequences. Fukasaku yelled back. Well, nobody ever told me that something like that was even possible. From the way that you were talking, it seemed like there wasn't any kind of limit on this thing. Naruto yelled and threw his hands into the air in exasperation, walking out of the office without sparing the two perplexed Sannin a single glance. Jiraiya and Tsunade blinked owlishly at the scene, turning questioning stares on the angry-looking Toad Elder. What happened? Jiraiya asked slowly. He was glad that Naruto was safe, but this looked serious. He had also caught a glimpse of the Reaper Death Seal and it was markedly different. Instead of the relatively small spiral on Naruto's stomach with script extending outwards a small distance, the lines of script were now much longer and extended all the way up to his chest. There were also additional pieces of script that connected those extended lines in a circular pattern. Not to mention that the seal usually wasn't visible like that for no reason. Your idiot apprentice pulled most of the natural energy in Myobokuzen into himself, that's what happened. Fukasaku yelled, still incredibly agitated. The two Sannin stared at the angry little toad with their jaws hanging, completely unable to process that statement. Maybe you should explain from the beginning. Tsunade suggested once her brain had rebooted enough to form words. Fukasaku took a deep breath to calm down a bit and begun explaining. Naruto-chan had just mastered senjutsu and we were going to move on to training to fuse ourselves with him, but he said that the Kyuubi probably wouldn't let that happen and to let him try something else. Tsunade and Jiraiya nodded their understanding, Jiraiya also feeling intensely proud of his godson for mastering something that he wasn't able to. Well, I saw no harm in it and left him alone so that he could think of something. Since he'd already learned how to balance the natural energy with his own chakra, there was no more danger of him getting turned to stone and I didn't need to be there anymore to keep that from happening. Fukasaku started looking angry again as he progressed further with the tale. Well, apparently I should have known better than to leave him alone. Me and Ma were woken up that night when we felt massive amounts of natural energy being drawn somewhere, far more than should be possible for any single person. We went to investigate and found Naruto-chan drawing all of it into himself, but not balancing it with his chakra. Wait a minute, shouldn't that have turned him to stone? Tsunade interrupted. She wasn't a sage, but she did know some things about senjutsu. It should have, but the damn fool was funneling it into the Reaper Death Seal and sealing it away. Fukasaku said, starting out in a normal tone of voice and ending in a yell. But how? The QB is already in there. Jiraiya protested in confusion. From what I've been able to gather so far, he's made some additions to the seal, such as sectioning off some of it to allow him pull in that much natural energy, but keeping it separated from his chakra network so that he ain't turned to stone. Jiraiya shook his head in amazement at his Gosun's ingenuity. That was quite the achievement. But there was one thing that still needed answering. That all sounds like a good thing though, so why are you so angry? The Toad-Sanin asked. Because Jiraiya-chan, nobody was ever meant to pull that amount of natural energy out of the environment. It'll take decades, maybe even a century before Myobokuzen will be able to teach another sage. But how is that possible? Jiraiya stammered out in shock. He hadn't thought that natural energy had any kind of limit. Natural energy builds up in areas where there's a great vibrancy of life. That's actually how the summon clans came to be. The life force of the environment allowed us to evolve into more than just animals. If it wasn't for that, Myobokuzen would be just a mountain full of regular toads. When a sage draws in natural energy, he takes on the characteristics of the species that the natural energy is most familiar with, as well as being empowered by the essence of the natural world. When sages do this, they borrow a tiny amount of the strength of the world around them, and when they exit sage mode, that natural energy is released back into the environment. Fukasaku took another deep breath and continued his explanation. What Naruto-chan did was draw in nearly all of the natural energy around him and is now keeping it imprisoned inside of himself, just like the QB. There was a long silence while Jiraiya and Tsunade took all of that in, hardly able to believe what the blonde Fuinjutsu master had done. So what happens now? Jiraiya asked, hiding just how nervous he felt. Effectively stealing all the natural energy from Myobokuzen was a big deal, and the white-haired Sanin knew that there would be consequences for it. Fukasaku sighed and answered. The other toads are very angry, Ma is angry, hell I'm angry, even the old geezer sage is angry. There was talk of removing Naruto-chan from the toad summoning scroll, and it looks like it's going to happen. Can't Naruto just go back to Myobokuzen and release the natural energy back to the environment? He didn't do it on purpose after all. Jiraiya asked desperately. He'd never heard of a summoner contract being broken before and knew that they must really be angry if they were considering it, but he didn't want his godson to be rejected by the toads. I don't know, but I wouldn't get my hopes up. He'd probably get turned to stone if he tried to release it all at once, and even in that case, it would still stay trapped inside him. Fukasaku grumbled. Well, we might as well ask him, maybe he knows how to release it safely. Tsunade said hopefully. She knew that Naruto's Fuinjutsu skill was truly ridiculous, so the crazy blonde might know how to reverse this disaster. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.